The mansion stood in quiet splendor. Tall white columns rose from the ground like silent sentinels, and the polished marble steps glistened under the morning sun. Inside, golden chandeliers hung from the ceilings, their crystals scattering light across silk curtains and velvet carpets. Every corner spoke of wealth, power, and perfection. But perfection is sometimes only a mask. Maria knew that better than anyone. She had worked in this house for years, moving silently through its vast halls with a feather duster in hand and humility in her step. She was the maid. No one noticed her presence expected, her silence assumed. Yet in her quiet heart, she carried both kindness and sorrow. Every morning, before the family even woke, Maria would sweep the staircase, polish the silver, and dust the grand piano that hadn't been played in years. Her hands bore the marks of endless scrubbing, and her back ached from bending to the will of others. But she never complained. Work was her only means of survival, her way of sending money home to the little village, where her parents and siblings still lived. Maria was invisible to the world. She was just another servant in a house too grand to see her. Humanity. Until that morning. As the sun crept through stained glass windows, Maria carried her pail and cloth to the west corridor. It was always silent there. Few entered the guest rooms except on rare occasions. The only sound was her own footsteps echoing off marble floors. But then, something broke the silence. A sound so soft it almost blended with the creak of the floorboards. A faint whimper. A cry? Maria stopped. She tilted her head, heart racing. She knew that sound. It was the cry of a baby. Fragile, urgent, alone. Her hands trembled as she set the bucket down. Slowly, cautiously, she followed the sound. With every step, the cries grew clearer, pulling her like an invisible thread until she reached a door near the end of the hall. Her fingers hovered over the brass handle. She pushed it open, and there inside the lavish room, draped in velvet and gold, was the unthinkable. A baby lying on the floor beside a canopy bed, wrapped in nothing more than a thin blanket, its cheeks wet with tears. The child's tiny fists flailed as it cried, its voice echoing through the emptiness. Maria gasped, rushing forward. "Oh, my sweet child," she whispered, scooping the infant into her arms. Its warmth pressed against her chest, its sobs softening as though it had been waiting for anyone to hold it. She rocked the baby gently, her mind spinning. Why was there a child here, alone? Who had left it? The mansion was home to only three. Mr. Henry Alden, the wealthy master of the house, his wife Eleanor, and Maria herself. There were no children, at least none Maria had ever been told of. She clutched the baby tighter, her heart aching at the thought of such innocence abandoned. The child needed love, care, protection, and yet here it was, left to cry in silence. Her questions multiplied, but before she could think further, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. The door swung wider, and in the frame stood Mr. Alden. He was a tall man, stern in expression, his tailored suit pressed with precision. His presence filled the room with authority, and his eyes, sharp and calculating, landed immediately on the sight before him. Maria, the maid, holding a baby in her arms. His jaw clenched. "What are you doing with that child?" His voice was cold, cutting. Maria's heart pounded. She lowered her gaze but tightened her grip on the baby instinctively, as though to shield it. "Sir, I found the baby here, alone, crying. I couldn't just leave it." For a long moment, silence stretched. The air in the room grew heavy. Then Mr. Alden's face darkened. He stepped forward, his tone low but trembling with suppressed fury. "That child should not be in this house." The words struck Maria like a blow. What did he mean? A baby, innocent, helpless. Yet his voice carried something like shame, even fear. Before she could speak again, another figure appeared. Mrs. Eleanor Alden entered, her elegant gown trailing behind her. But the moment her eyes fell on the baby, her hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled instantly, her voice breaking. "Henry," she whispered, looking at her husband. "Is it true? This child, is it yours?" Maria froze. The baby whimpered softly, unaware of the storm unraveling around it. Henry's face twitched, pride warring with guilt. He turned away, unable to meet his wife's eyes. His silence was louder than any confession. Eleanor's knees buckled, and she grasped the edge of a chair. "How could you hide this from me? A child, your child, left in a room, abandoned like a secret." Her sobs filled the air, mingling with the baby's faint cries. Maria stood still, her heart breaking for the woman before her. She had served this house long enough to know Eleanor's quiet suffering, the loneliness of a wife in a cold marriage, the silent dinners, the empty halls. And now, the truth cut deeper than any blade. Henry finally spoke, his voice low, defensive. I had no choice. If society knew, if the press discovered, everything I've built would collapse. The company, the reputation, I couldn't risk it. His words fell flat against the reality before them. A child, hidden away in a gilded prison, suffering for the sake of appearances. Eleanor straightened, her grief hardening into resolve. She stepped toward Maria, her hands trembling. "Give me the baby." Maria hesitated, then gently placed the child into Eleanor's arms. The transformation was instant. The baby nestled against her, its cries fading as it felt the warmth of a mother's embrace. Tears streamed down Eleanor's cheeks as she kissed its forehead. "This child is innocent," she whispered fiercely. "They bear no shame, no blame, only love." The words shattered the last defense in Henry's heart. The powerful man who had built empires on control sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands. For the first time, Maria saw him not as a master, but as a man broken by his own fear. The room held its breath. What would happen now? Maria stood quietly, her presence almost forgotten, but her role undeniable. She had been the one to hear the cry. She had been the one to act when no one else did. And now, her courage had uncovered a truth that would change the mansion forever. The shock was not only in the revelation of the child, but in what followed. Eleanor chose compassion. Instead of casting the child away, instead of drowning in betrayal, she looked at the baby and saw only purity. With determination burning through her grief, she declared, "This child will not be hidden. I will raise them as my own. This house will know love again." Henry looked up, his eyes wet, his pride stripped bare. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. When the infant's fingers curled around his, something inside him broke. The walls he had built for years crumbled in the face of innocence. And in that moment, wealth meant nothing. Reputation meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was the fragile life before them. Weeks passed, and the mansion changed. No longer silent, its halls rang with the laughter of a baby. The chandelier sparkled, not with cold grandeur, but with warmth. Eleanor walked proudly with the child in her arms, no longer burdened by appearances, but uplifted by love. Even Henry softened. The stern man who once ruled with fear now learned to kneel, to smile, to cradle the child who had forced him to confront his own heart. And Maria, she continued her work. But she was no longer invisible. The family acknowledged her with gratitude, their eyes meeting hers with respect. For it was her compassion that had uncovered the truth, her courage that had sparked the transformation. The baby grew stronger each day, nourished not just by milk, but by the love that finally surrounded it. And the mansion, once a symbol of pride and secrecy, became a place of redemption. But the true lesson was greater than one family's story. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest voices, the cries we are tempted to ignore, hold the power to reveal the deepest truths. It was proof that innocence can melt the hardest of hearts, that compassion can heal the deepest of wounds. Because in the end, the shock was not that a maid found a baby in the mansion. The shock was how that tiny, fragile life changed everything. And now, dear listener, the story turns to you. When you hear the cry of someone in need, will you listen? When you step forward, even when it feels like it isn't your place? Maria was just a maid. She had no wealth, no power. But her choice to act shifted the course of lives forever. Kindness does not require status. It requires only courage. If this story touched your heart, share it with others. Let it remind the world that even the smallest acts of compassion can uncover truths, heal wounds, and spark change. And if you'd like more stories of hope, courage, and humanity, subscribe. Together, we can keep these voices alive. Because sometimes, the smallest cry can awaken the greatest love.